All right, why don't we go ahead? Welcome, this is Authors at Google. I'm Brad Templeton from Google X. What we have today are two of the most respected writers of science fiction, particularly hard science fiction I think we have in the field, Gregory Benford and Larry Niven. Both of these men have been nominated for and won science fiction's top awards, the Hugo Award and the Nebula Award. You've probably read Larry's books in what's called the Known Space series, including works like Ringworld and Neutron Star. Gregory, I think, got his first big hit with Timescape, although I know you had other things, but that won you the Nebula Award. Gregory is also a professor of physics at UC Irvine, and he is also now a biotech entrepreneur, having worked to found a company called Genescient, whose goal is to stop human beings from dying like flies. And he may be able to answer some questions about that as well. They have a new book that's just come out this week called Bowl of Heaven that we see on the screen. And they're going to talk about that, and there's many other things in their careers that I'm sure will be interesting to us, and then we'll have Q&A.
Thank you.
Quite a crowd.
Nice crowd, see? And they're very orderly and everything. Yeah. This is a talk mostly about, of course, what everybody in the room probably knows, about the idea of what we're called big dumb objects. We'll get to that. But here's Ringworld, Larry's. Remember Ringworld? It's been 42 years.
It has been. We celebrated the 40th anniversary by running a reprint and a lot of publicity. Ringworld, let me talk about the big dumb, whoops. Okay, trying that again. Let me talk about the big dumb object concept. I like David Gerrold's phrase, which was the enormous big thing, as the plot line for a story. It sounds like nothing happens. The key to nothing happening was not our first discovery. It was all the marvelous empty cities found by Conan the Cimmerian and Tarzan of the Apes. Empty cities can be explored without things happening all at once. You can discover what's going on. You can find the interesting things. You can get attacked by the interesting monsters, one at a time. You drop Conan the Cimmerian into New York City, he'll be bewildered for a long time.
Yeah, mostly by the New Yorkers.
Mm-hmm. So I wrote Ringworld as nearly emptied of rulers. Nobody's running it. People came to be running it in later volumes, but for Ringworld, you don't even see who built it. It's just there, and you can explore. Well, with Skycycles, you can explore about 1/4 of the distance across the width is how much got explored in Ringworld, and that was my point. It's just too big to look at.
Yeah.
Notice, however, it's 93 million miles in radius, 600 million miles in circumference. It's the Earth's orbit, approximately. And it's entirely filled by a habitat. I made it a million miles across, but that's arbitrary. You could make it 2 or half, whatever you like. It's so big that air leaking over the rim walls, which stand 1,000 miles high at either edge, air leaking over the rim walls doesn't rob you of your atmosphere in any decent time. It can last millions of years doing that.
Yeah.
That's sorry.
And that's what makes it dumb.
Yeah. Well, it is perhaps a dumb idea, but it gives you better visuals.
No, but
and I was after the visuals.
It's dumb in the sense of being struck dumb in awe at the prospect of even exploring the thing. You see, it's too big to cross, but it's not too big to write about. And the whole point, next slide, is that this book, that this whole idea descends also from something probably all of you know, the Dyson Sphere idea. Because Freeman Dyson just said, look, a really advanced civilization will use all the energy that's getting wasted into the night sky by its star, and it will absorb it and use it for something. And then, of course, because of the laws of physics, it'll re-radiate it into infrared. So the thing to look for, and the reason this is published as a scientific paper, not just a speculation, is unexplained infrared objects that are very compact in the night sky. By the way, I'll get to a recent grant given to look for exactly that in a little bit at UC Berkeley.
But the point of the idea is that you can find it.
Yeah.
You don't have to wait for people who want to talk to us.
Yeah.
Superpowered beings who have been civilized for 1 billion years are not likely to want to talk to us. But if they've built Dyson spheres, you can find them.
If the galaxy might easily be full of entities that don't really especially want to talk to us, for example, New Yorkers. So the whole idea comes also from later ideas that people have manifested, like if it's in the stage of being built, it's going to take a while to build this. You could get a Dyson swarm of solar power satellites and habitats like this. Next. Or, and you could put them in various kinds of orbits that would make it look like what's called a Dyson bubble, like this. And there are all kinds of ideas about how to maintain these structures, and therefore, over time, you would use up the resource. Next. And so, toward the end, it might even look like this. And therefore, this is actually an object we could look at using Kepler and other satellites, and the recently finished infrared search called WISE. That's an acronym as usual. Next slide. And therefore, a grant was just gotten by Jeff Marcy over at UC Berkeley that will use the Lick Observatory right over there on the hills to look for Dyson spheres using the best data we now have accumulated from those two missions, the WISE and the Kepler. And you can actually, if you care to, you can put this in as a public charity, actually. If you go to that address, you can make a donation to the Dyson Sphere search.
So why are you looking at me in particular?
Well, because you're a large infrared object. And walked right into that one, Brad.
I'm a skilled engineer, but my job is pushing a next button on the slide.
Exactly so. So you see, this is an ongoing project. I mean, I've known Jeff Marcy a long time, and I knew he was interested in this, and while we were writing the novel, it all came to mind. Now it actually, coincidentally, just time to come up with our book is the news that he got the grant, $200,000. You'd be amazed what you can do for such a small amount of money at Google. Next. Here's the definition of a big, dumb object. Give you a minute to read it. Okay, time's up. And this is Google, right? No, go back to the other.
The minutes are still 60 seconds longer.
This is from Peter Nichols, a noted SF critic, who said, basically, it's an interesting, as Larry pointed out, it's a great narrative structure because nobody bothers your protagonist while he staggers around and trying to understand what's going on. And that actually is useful in Ringworld and Conan, because Conan apparently doesn't seem to be that bright anyway.
But it is the amateurish, the semi-amateurish way to write. I knew I was young and foolish and needed more skills when I wrote Ringworld.
Right. This, by the way, is from an essay that's on my own website. With Peter's permission, I put the whole essay up about rereading hard science fiction. That's a lot of thoughts about it. You can go to gregorybenford.com and go down in the blog, and or somewhere on that site, among the articles, I think, and it's got his essay. Okay, time's up. Next slide. And, of course, if you've been around in this field long enough, you know that there were the O'Neill fashion, the big fashion of the 1970s was writing about these cylinder colonies that we would put in space and have habitats and so forth. Jerry O'Neill pursued this in great detail and showed that he could do it, and it was a good idea. And then, as typical in much of the evolution of science fiction, it fades away and you get another idea. I can remember when I started reading SF in the 1950s, the big idea was telepathy. Whatever happened to that idea, right? Next.
Robert Silverberg happened to that idea.
Yes, Robert Silverberg. Yeah. Although Connie Willis is writing a telepathy novel now, she told me. Next.
Precognition sort of failed too as a theme. I wonder why they didn't see that coming.
That's good. And then Rendezvous with Rama, Arthur C. Clarke. Big alien artifact, suspiciously like an O'Neill colony, comes into the solar system and takes off for parts unknown. And you explore it. And again, there appears to be nobody in charge. There's some aliens crawling around. They turned out to be maintenance features. Nobody knows what the hell this was for, and then it goes. That's the thing. You try to leave the wizard behind the curtain if you possibly can. Next. And this is ours. That's the bowl of heaven. That little bright point, that's a star. The big blue and white zone is the main habitable zone, but you actually can live under that rather tan-colored section, which is mirrors. Not entirely mirrors, but mostly.
Notice something here. If you start with a Dyson sphere and work within the laws of physics as we know them, you're bound to wind up using just the equator and spinning it for gravity.
Yeah.
You spin it for gravity. The equator is the only thing that'll hold an atmosphere, because from the higher levels, atmosphere will flow down. In this object, you still have to pocket the atmosphere to avoid losing it. But the half Dyson sphere doesn't quite work. You wind up with a ring world with a walk-shaped lid, and a hole in the lid if you're going to make it move.
Tell them the title.
The title is The Bowl of Heaven.
Yeah, but our first title was Walk World.
Yeah.
Somehow it didn't seem to quite...
And then I borrowed a term which I'd seen 40 years ago for a cartoon done, for a set of cartoons done about the ring world. One of them laid out the plot line in a few hundred words and called it Cup World. You've got a half of a Dyson sphere, spaceports in the handle, and night and day provided by orbiting tea bags.
Yeah, and somehow that didn't get written up. I don't know why.
Cup World wasn't good enough. Bowl of Heaven works just fine.
And you'll notice there are other features here. Those mirrors in a great fraction of the bowl reflect back onto a tiny spot on the surface of the rapidly rotating star. As you know, stellar rotation gives you strong magnetic fields. It's true on our side. Very high magnetic fields. And this concentrated energy ignites a flare which turns into a jet. It bulges out, and then the magnetic fields that are entrained focus the jet so it streams through the knothole. The whole system is going somewhere.
The star is accelerating, and the bowl follows because of gravity and some fancy magnetic fields.
Right. And here I was again able to moonlight because I published several dozen papers on the dynamics, the stability, and origin of the jets that come from the accretion disks around both stars and black holes. And published them in an astrophysical journal, gone to a lot of conferences, and I decided to use that expertise because jets form naturally an astonishingly large number of times. We now have seen hundreds of jets coming from black hole regions around the universe. And there are dozens around black holes and stars in our galaxy. So the jet and the bowl all make an integrated system that is a transport system that people can live in. Mysteries ensue.
It's a big, smart object because it needs constant maintenance. You don't dare lose your civilization. You lose your civilization, you've lost your habitat. It'll spin out of control. It'll impact the sun. It'll go straight to hell.
Right. Yet much of the land in the bowl of heaven is natural. It's a natural habitat. It has enormous parks. They utterly dominate. It's not just a big New York City. And so you have to wonder, why was this built and who built it and what's its point? And obviously the point is that it's going somewhere, unlike Ringworld. Interesting plot point, right? I mean, all of this is the pre-thinking before you write the first line. And in the first line, someone is waking up, a human, a guy, a biologist, on a starship that's headed for a planet called Glory, because the watch officers, almost all the expedition is in a deep sleep and fairly cold. The watch officers suddenly saw appear off to the side this thing, because they had overtaken it. Because you couldn't see it from behind, the star was blocked, and the jet wasn't quite luminous enough to register it at a distance. And the thing is about a quarter of a light year away anyway.
What Greg hasn't said is this thing is accelerating directly away from Earth
Yeah.
with the same target as the spaceship that contains our protagonists.
Yes.
They were bound to catch up. The bowl wasn't big enough to see until they got closer, and of course they're moving through the flare.
Yeah. Which has some implications about what's been happening to the starship, which we'll let you discover when you read the Google discounted book. And so all of this is the beginning of the plot. You notice how much thinking you've got to do before you can write the first page. It really does help to plan.
Yeah. And until you write the first page, it's all recreation.
Yeah.
Collaborations don't become work until you start writing.
Yes.
Until then, it's just fun.
Yeah. Until then, it's an excuse to meet in a bar.
Yeah. I have spent a whole afternoon walking with a guy named Michael Curlin, carving out a novel as we went, as we walked around the hills of Berkeley. We get back to the house and we find out that neither of us actually wants to write it.
Yeah. You sucked all the fun out of it. That's
Yeah.
that's the thing. Don't eat the cream first. That's the usual rule about desserts. Yes. The bowl spins quite rapidly, as you would guess, to create an artificial gravity. And as you'll see, and your location in the bowl, and all the bowl has habitat in it. It's not just mirrors plus a habitat somewhere else. You can have very light gravity, and therefore the species are different. The living conditions are different. And the humans in this novel get to experience several of these different Gs. The main equatorial section is called the Great Plain, and it's at 0.8 Gs. This sketch is in the book. Use your homework.
The sketches, the visuals, all of the visuals were done from sketches we made by Don Davis.
Yeah.
Who took a flat fee for doing several paintings.
Yes. Next. Several paintings indeed, because this is a close-up of the Don Davis. He's a guy I've known since Chesley Bonestell introduced him to me, and Don was 18 years old. It's back in the late 1960s. Here's a close-up. You can see the mirror zone, and you can see the storms above both oceans and land in the Great Plain. And you'll see everything is such a scale that you can't tell anything about the inhabitants at this range, which is largely true of the Earth, except for some large constructions. Next.
In fact, the thing looks so planet-like that you have to keep remembering, and the protagonists have to keep remembering, you're looking across interplanetary scales, objects as far away as Mars.
Yeah. But you can tell essentially the major characteristics over an interplanetary distance. And so this is a scene that occurs fairly early in. The way for this starship to actually maneuver in is first it has to lose some velocity, and it wants to explore the object, so it flies up the jet to decelerate. Great scene to write. And this is a Don Davis painting. You'll see the larger version in, unfortunately, black and white, although in the E edition, maybe it's in color. I actually haven't even looked at the E edition. Notice the large magnetic coils around the rim of the knothole. And there's some other magnetic features, too. There's a lot of magnetism in this because I've done a lot of classical electrodynamics, and I taught it at UC Irvine, the advanced class, the graduate class. So the to me, the most important technology of the last 200 years has clearly been that derives from the Maxwell equations. I mean, it's made this company, right? I mean, it's the key technology. And we're still mining it. Only a few months ago, some guys at Imperial College in London announced an easy way to produce a coherent microwave emitter from a solid by flashing light on it. Completely new discovery. It's going to revolutionize microwave transmission. It's amazing. You don't even have to tune. Next.
And it gets us cheap solar sails.
That's right.
My interest.
Also, yeah, that's an immediate application. Here's a view from standing in the Great Plain, looking out into the distance on a very clear day. This is a clear day. Okay. It has a deep ocean, which is held in by a membrane at the top. And this is the kind of view that we imagine would be true if you were able to stand there and look across at and see such great distances. This is on a clear day, remember. So you see some fading with distance, but not a lot. Next. And here's another part of that view. It's all part of one painting. You'll notice in the foreground there's what we call a zigzag tree, which is an adaptation we haven't explained yet to this world. There's a human walking over toward the left, and you can see the scale as the whole thing just runs away into the distance over colossal distances. It's inverse to a planet in that the horizon tilts up, so you can see great distances. But there's something else in there. Next slide. Something else within view, and it's this. This is an animal. It looks like a fish because it flies through the air very slowly. It's like a giant blimp. And it's actually the means of transport, one of the means of transport that the inhabitants use. Because guess what? There's not going to be a climate change problem here because there are no fossil fuels. You have to get around in some other means. You can make fuels, of course, the way we do with ethanol, but it's cheaper to get around, since you've got a lot of time, in a method that doesn't burn something, because you have to be careful of the environment. You don't want too much oxidation to run out of control. So that's some of the environment that we have spent a whole lot of time and fun in designing. The whole strategy of the first book is to show you a lot of things, let you reach some assumptions, and then undermine them and prove them false in the second book. Yes, that's what makes it fun for us. Anything more about this? Is called a skyfish, by the way. It's called by the humans skyfish.
You can't pronounce the word in bird folk.
Yeah, because the bird folk are the people who run this place, and they have a lot of feathers, and it's one of their major modes of expression. And they regard these curious primates who come on board and have to be, of course, immediately grabbed and corralled. I mean, you don't want new influences, right? You don't want instability in the bowl, because instability means death. But these primates have this curious thing that, they make gestures with their arms. They have these funny little facial expressions, and they try to convey meaning with them. But they don't use the full glory of a fan feather presentation. They can't change colors. They can't rattle and rustle and move. I mean, it just shows you how limited they are. Poor things. And they have this kind of simple starship. Well, we've seen a lot of those before. They come and go, Different attitude.
We've been avoiding some spoilers so far.
Yes, and we're going to keep avoiding them, aren't we?
Okay, Greg.
Okay,
that
which
was
one?
The topic.
Okay, one spoiler.
I'm not going to tell them about the builders, right?
Oh, right. Yeah.
As with Ringworld, you don't know much about the builders till you get into the book.
Yeah. Right. Because it's just too damn much to show you all of New York in one day, right?
But the builders do go on stage quick. Yeah. They have to with a big smart object, because that's who's running everything. They're quite obvious, quite obtrusive.
Yes. But there's an old saying, my father was a professional army officer. That's how I ended up spending 3 years in occupied Germany, 3 years in occupied Japan, and I learned things about hierarchies, both in Japan and in the army. When you go into the GQ, the General Headquarters, the first person you meet is not a general. That rule applies to the bowl. Next slide. Conservative means careful because big smart object means
Sorry about that.
it's not
Okay.
neutrally stable, like the Ringworld was supposedly first thought to be.
fine.
It turns out it's not neutrally stable. In fact, I gave the problem of calculate the stability of the Ringworld as a problem on the qualifying exam for the PhD at UC Irvine one year. And guess how many people out of 18 candidates managed to do the calculation correctly and reach the right conclusion? 1? Do I hear 2? 0? How many pessimists? How many vote for 0? Yeah, well, you're right to be skeptical. The correct number is 2 out of 18. They said it was one of the toughest problems they'd ever had on an exam because they hadn't seen one like it before. And you see, I wanted to privilege the people who had read Ringworld. I've never said that in public before. It was 1977, so they'd had a chance. You know. Okay.
Really? Because we did that one in high school integration. I mean, just no mass, no gravity inside a disk or sphere. We did that, but anyway.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, you can
in
do
fact,
it. It's just an integral.
They were using Ringworld calculations at my high school
Yeah.
last time I visited.
You can calculate the potential field and then show that a lateral movement increases the energy and therefore the system will go that way. So the Ringworld will simply slide into the star. If you push it, it will just keep going.
Yeah.
Like a ball running down a hill.
Which is why there are attitude jets in the second book.
Right. And somebody, so in Bowl of Heaven, actually, I think I left this out deliberately. It'll be in the second book. Somebody says, how come they just don't turn off the jet and coast? Think for a minute.
Yeah. Bowl, interstellar wind.
Yeah. And the star, who wins? Well, it's a complicated dynamics problem.
Yeah. The wind stops the bowl. The sun, being more massive, keeps going. You lose your sun. Now what?
Right. But it could be, if you're in a low density region, that the sun's gravity wins. In either way it goes, it's unstable. If you turn off the jet, you're dead. The bowl is spinning. That keeps your orientation, but it doesn't help you with the instability. And there are other problems, too. How is this maintained? By a complicated set of magnetic fields. A rapidly spinning object with electrical charge generates a magnetic field. And lots of great engineering, which I hope will form the basis for future qualifying exam questions. Well, you probably read this one. Is this the last? No, it's not. Yeah. So smart means vigilant. You can read that. It's more effective.
I did deal with the problem of drilling into vacuum on the Ringworld
Yeah.
long ago.
Right.
It's the reason you don't find oil wells.
Yeah. But the if you're on the bowl and you drill through, you're not only going to be sucked through by the vacuum, you have a velocity relative to the rest of the background of hundreds of kilometers a second. And it's going to get you into trouble because the outside of the bowl, we have some interesting things about this in the second book. The outside of the bowl is not just bare skin. It has constructs on it. It's useful. So you're almost certainly going to run into something. So it's going to be a very bad idea to think about. And they have safeguards against that. The point about this is to say, why should we think about this enormous object? Well, it's a way of thinking about what would intelligent life do if it really had a lot of time and a big energy budget and had motivations that are not ours. There's an old story told about bringing an Aboriginal from Australia in the 19th century to London. And he looked at St. Paul's Cathedral and these buildings and these streets. And he said, this is very impressive, but why did you do it? Why did you bother? I mean, he couldn't see the point of building large buildings and a city. It just didn't seem like something he wanted to do. Well, maybe the Bowl of Heaven will be something that we wouldn't want to do, but somebody did, and who was that? That's really the thrust of the book. And oh, by the way, why is it going to glory, the target for the starship? And then some other things. As we always say toward the end, the events ensue. This is why it's fun to write these books. It's because it's just kind of fun to fool around with ideas. And from the point of view of a guy who's published over 200 scientific papers, it is very much like doing science when it's really good. That is, you're having new ideas, you're working them out in a rigorous way. The writing, as Larry said, is the hard part.
And things keep surprising you.
Yes, that's right. And so we keep kicking my ideas back.
Yeah. We've been hard at work on the second book as we drove around the Southern California area. If you can carpool, you can collaborate.
Yeah. And it's more productive than just listening to classic rock.
Yeah.
So it's a fun process. And our intention is to finish this subject in 2 books. Now, Ringworld has how many books now?
Ringworld is 4, and Ringworld is finished. It was going to be 1.
Until further notice.
This one we planned 2, and we're still planning 2. It's not going to be one of those 7-part trilogies.
Yes. Or even a 3-part trilogy, because, trilogies, the classic problem with the trilogy is the middle book, right? How to eliminate this problem? Make it 2 books. Seems simple. So, why don't we do Q&A? But it actually announces part of the narrative strategy of telling such stories. So we thought, what's the opposite?
It's a critic's term.
It's a critic's term.
It's a critic who was not impressed by a flood of big dumb object stories. Ringworld followed by Orbitsville and the Rendezvous with Rama and several others.
And Varley's books. He wrote a big dumb object trilogy, which is the only part of his work which is out of print. Mm-hmm. Interestingly, he told me.
Well, he broke too many physics laws with that one.
Yeah, that's true.
And bent probability a lot too far.
Wait a minute, you talking about Titan?
Yes.
That wasn't dumb.
Wasn't it? No, you're right. Someone was in charge.
Oh, there was somebody in charge, yes. That's true. But it tended, like most ideas in science fiction, to have a half-life of roughly a decade and then to go away. So now it's back.
Hi, thanks for coming. It's great fun to have you here. How are the inhabitants protected against ionizing radiation?
Lots of atmosphere, for one thing. And for another, that sun is a wretched little red dwarf.
Yeah.
You've got the flare, but it's generating mostly heat. Check me out on this, because you're the expert.
That's true. No, I mean about what you said.
Okay. Okay.
But it's also the magnetic field.
Hundreds of kilometers of atmosphere being held in by what is essentially the far future descendants of a sandwich baggie.
Yes, right. But the whole region is magnetically dominated, and so you fend off a lot of the cosmic rays.
Flare is confined. If you fiddle with the flare, you're going to get ionizing radiation where you don't want it. Something to remember.
That's right. The trick in this system is that the jet is very dangerous, and it will always work perfectly until the second volume.
So you said the Bull's going somewhere, and you said it's hard to stop.
The Bull is a spacecraft, and it's been traveling for a long time. It's visited many places.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, you said it would be very hard to stop or, I assume, even turn and get into an orbit. Yeah. So what the heck's going to happen about that?
There. Light years are big.
Yeah.
Light years are big. You don't need to make a hairpin turn. And if you did, you could do it around the sun.
But even an infinitesimal turn would, I assume, give you the same problems you described with turning off the jet.
Well, remember, you can apply a torque over a very long time. Yes, as he said, you can make the turn slowly. It has to. The knot is only so big. But, 747s don't make house calls. You fly by, you got time, you send faster ships, you explore the region, and you keep going.
And launching a spaceship is fairly easy. You just drop it off the edge
Yeah.
at around 600 miles per second.
Yeah.
A pivot from plot to business for a moment, if you would. I'd be interested in your two perspectives as authors on the changes in the publishing industry, specifically related to, I don't know about the rest of you, but I don't buy many of these in paper form anymore. And I'd be interested from seeing how this looks from your side of the pen.
I carry a Kindle.
Yeah.
Can you get Play Store on the Kindle?
I don't waste
I got
time
my
either.
Kindle free from Jeff Bezos.
Yeah, right.
At a 3-day party, he threw for around 40
Yeah.
of the people and their wives and husbands
Right.
whom he wanted to meet.
Yeah. And the Kindle was signed.
Yeah.
That's another thing about collectors is they want the print edition, information stored in the bodies of dead trees, because you can get them signed. There are ways around that. David Brin and I reissued a novel of ours, Heart of the Comet, and we give away a card that we have signed that is the card for Heart of the Comet. You can keep it on your file if you want, but otherwise it's the electronic edition, although there is a print on demand. But what you're talking about is the big war that's going on in publishing. And at the moment, it's really like the opening chapters of World War II. It's all offense, no defense. We were just doing a signing on the Queen Mary Saturday night for the Independent Booksellers of Southern California, their annual meeting. And there were several speeches at the banquet about, they were Amazon hate sessions, right? I mean, it was like a scene from 1984, everybody chants about Big Brother or something. And at the same time, New York publishing is getting hollowed out. You can tell it by the growing incompetence of the staff, who have been recently hired, and they fired the executives. No one seems to understand that up ahead in the future, there's some kind of equilibrium we're going to approach, and no one seems to be really thinking forward about that equilibrium now. Barnes & Noble is tottering and may collapse, the last big chain that's across the continent. The independents are finding niche markets, such as Books Inc., one of my favorite bookstores, is actually a chain, about, 7 or 8 stores. Very good store. And they make a point of being up on everything, knowing what's going on. You walk into the store, they've got the book you heard about today on NPR or read in the New York Times. But how does this all work? I don't know, except the writers are actually, I think, in many ways, the biggest beneficiaries. Because we now have options. We can control our work. I am reissuing my novels selectively, although I know I could get publishers to reissue them. I can reissue them myself. I can hire the artist. I hired a copywriter, a copy editor. I've got a professional editor I use, even to revisit novels I've written before and prune them up and change, adjust the physics. I care about that kinds of thing. I'm working on a novel of mine from the aughts, Cosm, which is actually set at UCI, and it was a nice chance to satirize other members of my department, some of whom luckily are dead.
Coincidence?
Yes. Some say not. So we can choose our markets. We can choose to do print on demand or just e-edition. I've done both. Larry's starting to reissue his books this way. Yeah. The point is, the books are going to be always available, at least in digital form and print on demand, and that's a whole new landscape for a writer. And for the first time in my career, our career, there's a sense of real opening for the writers. And you may not think about it right away, but there's the publishers and there's bookstores and all that, but they wouldn't have a business without us. And we're getting some control of how we want the fields to work. That's a good field.
For your sense of proportion.
Yeah.
My first novel, I had to settle for 4% royalties.
God, really?
Yeah.
World of Tabs?
Well, I was a novice, yeah. 4% royalties. My agent later argued them into a bigger proportion. But most people get 10% or 8% royalties. And you get that after you've been in the field 2 or 3 books deep. H.G. Wells used to get 25%, an amazing figure. He got that, I presume, because he put some money into it. He was part of the backing of the backer. I'm getting, my agent is putting out my books as the contracts lapse. And one by one, they're going into electronic print, for which I get 85%. My agent keeps the 15% she's entitled to.
Yeah.
This is an amazing change.
Yeah. It feels great to do something better than H.G. Wells.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So, to conclude on that, it's a time of the greatest change since that guy named Gutenberg. And it will mean enormous amount, particularly to the vast majority of humanity that has never really had access to books. I've been to India a lot and Africa, and believe me, these are people who are starved for information and have been so for thousands of years. Can you imagine a civilization that was information starved forever? Well, read the history books. That's most of human history. This is really going to alter humanity. And I, with my biases, think, look, I come from a small town in southern Alabama. Information starved, I know what we're talking about. My brother and I'm an identical twin, went to a one-room schoolhouse when we were growing up in a farm community. It changes your view of the world.
That it does.
So our species used to build things that, we have ruins from millennia ago. And now you're in front of a room full of people who routinely get woken up in the middle of the night because our system needs our help. So I'm wondering if you see a sort of a broad societal trend towards building smarter objects that need more maintenance.
Smarter objects that need more maintenance?
Yeah.
Obama would support that.
Yeah.
Jobs.
You mean Steve, or?
No, I mean jobs.
Oh. That is an interesting way to look at it. But the reason is, of course, that builds a society of smart people. I mean, people who can manage a complex system. If you're building the pyramids, a big, dumb object, you don't need literate people. So it's easy to be impressed by gargantuan things. But gargantuan smart things is qualitatively different. I wrote a whole book, which, in fact, I'm going to bring back into print within a year or so, called Deep Time. Subtitle was How Humanity Communicates Across Millennia. It's nonfiction, about my experience of trying to design long-term messages at various places like the nuclear waste facility in New Mexico and the Cassini mission to Saturn. And one of the things I learned, to my astonishment, is that there were many museums and art galleries and libraries in the ancient world. Guess how many survived the collapse of the Roman Empire or other empires? 0. Parts of them were left over. None of the institutions survived. So, if you really want a long-term message, in the ancient past anyway, you should invest in granite. Carve it deep and leave it in a desert.
I'm a big Ringworld fan, and recently computer graphics imaging is, I think, made it possible to actually make movies out of this. Not that they might fit in 2 or 3 hours, but I just wondered what you thought of those kinds of ideas. And I think, in general, the idea of, books are wonderful because you don't need any computer graphics imaging. You can think of it in your mind, but now we have the technology to do all these kinds of movies, and we're making readers dumber, by making these movies with big explosions.
Are we making readers dumber by showing so much in a movie?
Well, you're making moviegoers dumber. But tell them about the Ringworld movie.
The Ringworld movie has suffered over the decades because I signed some papers I shouldn't have early in my career. But we renegotiated a contract a couple of years ago, and now the guy who has the right to has shopped it to MGM. That's all I know. The movie is at MGM, and if Mandel fails to come through with it, I get a chance to make a movie, but that won't happen for a little while.
Yeah, but everything you say about special effects is quite so.
You don't really need actors anymore.
No, you don't even need a big budget. Remember the movie Moon, made by the son of a famous rock star, for what was it, $1 million, some small sum, and it made tens of millions because
New to me.
there was a good script. It was a smart script, and the special effects were cheap.
I'm remembering Tom Corbett's Space Cadet, when you had to imagine most of what you were supposed to be seeing.
Hell, you had to imagine what you were seeing. I mean, rocket ships in which the exhaust rises as it goes across. Yeah, well, I mean, it never occurred to them apparently to turn the camera sideways and just have the rocket ship come down like this, so the exhaust would appear to be going away from the rocket.
Do you know how they got free fall in 2001: A Space Odyssey?
Yeah, they spun the giant hoop.
They put the astronaut on a line and then shot him from underneath so that the line didn't show.
Yes, that's
Now he's in free fall.
right. No, and it was remarkably convincing.
Yeah.
Really was. Arthur Clarke gave me a photograph of him walking through that rotating drum that they used for the interior of the spaceship, to the famous establishing shot where the guy appears to run over the ceiling. And he did the same thing. He said there's a film of him doing the same thing, but I haven't seen it. But it was funny to see him in this futuristic context, which now lies in the past. 2001.
I like the way they did the special effects for Apollo 13, so to get the zero gravity.
Yeah.
Back to something that you just said. So on the one hand, we have electronic books, which means you can reissue things, you can publish things, you can make more money with it, which I think is wonderful, by the way. The downside is something that you just said. If you want it to last, put it in granite. One of the reasons I don't buy electronic books is I don't want Amazon deciding that for some reason I didn't buy their electronic book after I've already got it. I want to keep it. I want to have my own backup, my own copies.
Well, buy both.
Well, where do you if it's in print, But again, if it's in print or if it's only in electronic form, I can go to the used bookstore and look forever and maybe find it, maybe not. Where do you stand on that sort of DRM restrictions? High price, low price, vast distribution kind of thing.
I like cheaper books.
Yeah, me too.
Except ours.
Well, you just
No, I actually like
everybody
cheaper
buys
books.
them, right? So,
Yeah.
it's kind of a trade-off.
I want my ideas spread. I don't even mind pirates very much. I mind them some.
Yeah.
True. What you bring up is a serious issue. First, I'm against DRM. Second, if you really want to keep your electronic books safe and preserve them forever, well, you can put them in orbit where I don't think they can reach them. But it's always good to have a backup. I mean, that's what I tell people when they say, what is it like to be an identical twin? I say, have a backup. So I, too, like physical books. And I have a few electronic books, but I don't mostly read that way. But they're crowding me out of my houses. So there's the downside.
Me too. Me too. If you can't bear to throw away a book, you're in trouble eventually. They pile up.
Right. And thank you for it. Oh, great.
Oh, there are books that I've wanted to throw away.
Yeah. Well, as a conservationist, you could burn them for heat, which further has the benefit that other people will not be troubled by reading it.
So you've touched on this a little bit, but I was wondering if you might want to talk a little bit more about collaboration. I mean, I think, Larry, you're becoming known as a great collaborator. Once when I was angry at Jerry Purnell, I told him, Jerry, you write really good books when you write with Larry.
And he said...
I think he was flattered myself. I
So-
write really good books when I write with Jerry.
No, you do actually. I think the two of you together do stuff that you don't do on your own. And so tell me what it is about the collaborative process that makes that happen.
You learn each other's strengths. Jerry's, for instance, are with military and politics. Mine are with aliens and characters who go crazy.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Crazy characters.
Yeah, when a heroic character is wading his way through a sea of troubles, fighting his way toward a goal, that's Jerry. The character goes nuts, that's me.
And it says so much about your lives.
Yeah. Collaborations are more fun and more friendly than sitting at your typewriter all alone writing. Of course, as a collaborator, you're going to do a lot of that anyway, because you don't live together in the same house unless you're man and wife.
Yeah.
Jerry and I live about 25 minutes away from each other. Greg lives an hour and a half away, maybe 2.
Yeah.
But we've got the internet.
Right.
When we didn't have the internet, Jerry lived a little closer, and it was easier, but we still had to carry text back and forth.
Yeah.
What you're saying, as soon as he got the internet, he moved farther away from you?
No, you got the right idea, but I was the one who moved.
Yeah. Right. To a bigger house. Bigger still.
Yeah. The books were piling up. We had to move to a bigger house.
You're quite right. It's we have different strengths. You know, I'm a physicist. He's an alien. He's an alien, right?
Greg's got the electromagnetic fields that I don't know very much about.
But it's also true that writing is a lonely business, and you can advance your ideas faster by speaking them. We all know that, and kicking ideas back and forth generates new ideas at a much faster rate than sitting there staring at a cathode ray tube or a screen of some kind. It's just one of the strengths of human beings. I mean, we're a collaborative species, right? That's why we talk so much.
Yeah. I do not have the patience to be a scientist.
Yeah.
I knew that fairly early.
Yeah, and there's a deeper thing here. Modern science fiction, by the way, which invented fandom, the word and the thing itself, and fanzines and all of that, came out of the scientific technical culture. It has always been marked by a high degree of collaboration, and that is true in the scientific and engineering culture. This is not true in the literary culture. Collaborations are rare. It's because they come out of an older and different culture. Scientists inherently collaborate. By far the majority of all scientific papers are collaborations. A high fraction of SF work is collaborations. A minority, but far higher than in other fields. Even in mysteries, very few collaborations. Westerns, romance novels, they're almost all individual writers. Not so in science fiction. And so it underlies the fact that science fiction is a cultural expression of the dominant force in modern times, science and technology. Try to imagine the last 2 centuries without science and technology and its rate of change. Actually, try to imagine the last 2 centuries without the United States of America, but that's another discussion. So you ought to realize that this is actually part of a very much larger phenomenon that is taking over the world. You know, we have many competitors in Asia and so forth. They're copying our methods. Some years ago at the World Science Fiction Convention in Tokyo, I spoke to the team of 6 editors from the Chinese science fiction magazine. We've never had a science fiction magazine that had 6 editors. It's a monthly. It has a circulation of about 1/3 to 500,000 copies, whereas analog sells about 35,000 a month. And the Chinese government supports this magazine, subsidizes it, because they want to invert the process. You see, the first science fiction magazine was Amazing Stories, published by a group of radio magazines, and it was the anomaly inside there, and it's the only one that anyone remembers now. The Chinese want to draw their own people into the culture of science and technology and the habits of mind by using science fiction. They are inverting, reverse engineering what we did naturally and spontaneously in the 20th century. So this is an important phenomena going around the world. And it's the reason there are now science fiction conventions in India and other seemingly unlikely places, Africa even. And it's part of the shaping of human culture that is being done by you, the technological elite.
So I think we're running close to the end. I'll ask one last question, actually, because you two are both well known for being specialists in hard science fiction, by which I like to call realistic science fiction that actually follows the physics. Now, it's not just necessary to follow physics. I often say romance novels have excellent physics, and they very rarely violate those laws. They may violate the laws of chemistry, but not the laws of physics.
And of biology.
But what is it that you feel is the great virtue of hard science fiction? What is it that makes, when you sit down to write, why do you feel that that's what you must write?
I'm not a fanatic on the subject. I have written science fiction, I've written fantasy, I have written detective fiction. When I get up the nerve, I write detective science fiction, and I've got to tell you, it's the hardest work.
Yeah.
I generally write science fiction because that's where my ideas come from. I've got no contempt for every other field of fiction. They will all teach you to read, and reading teaches you to think. There was a phenomenon called laser books. Laser books was going to be science fiction as produced by a house that produced mostly all romance novels. They were going to branch out, going to be science fiction, going to be the label that sells rather than the author's name. This, as far as I was concerned, was a great way to train readers to read, and eventually they'd grow up and read my stuff. As it turned out, the name was what sold anyway, and I do mean the name of the author. Robert Gleason, my favorite editor, told me that he tends to travel among the people who transport the books to the stores, the distributors. He told me he was at a bar where they were gathered, and from the next table he hears there's only one laser book that sells at all well, and it's by one author, and his name turned out to be Jerry Pournelle's laser books.
Oh,
were the only ones who sold well among laser.
Right.
And laser bowed out gracefully, returned all rights, got out of the field, and it was one of those happy stories as far as people who think that the author's name ought to be what sells books best.
Yeah.
All right, well, on that note, I'd like to thank our two guests for a fabulous presentation.